Hey everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. We're going to be all over the place, hitting little random stories. A lot of this unit has been like that, where we're just hitting like little mini stories because we're basically painting a picture that's some foreshadowing, because we're going to talk about some American artists in this today as well, which is pretty cool. But it's going to paint a picture of what American culture looked like in the early 1800s, as much as possible without going real deep into slavery. Because in modern day, it's such a, the elephant in the room is that humans owned other humans in America just a couple hundred years ago. Or about 170 years ago at this point. So it's a big elephant in the room. So because of that, a lot of the culture in America gets overlooked because of the evil of the institution of slavery that existed. So a lot of these units have been looking at the things that are not slavery, and then next unit we're going head first into slavery and division and sectionalism. So here today we're going to start finishing up this unit, talking about the different reforms and cultures and things that developed in America that started giving America a very unique American identity. All right. Let me make myself smaller here. Beep, 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 beep. All right. So reforming society. All right. Reforming society. So we had mentioned some of the stuff. Well, we were talking about reforming society yesterday. We didn't talk about any of this. All right. So let's start talking about utopian communities. So a utopian community is this idea where you and your 150 closest friends just move out into the middle of nowhere and create a perfect society. Like, everything is going to be different and it's going to be perfect. This was attempted multiple times in America by different people. Sounds a little bit like a cult leader, and no, I don't even want to go down that route and call anybody a cult leader. But it's this idea that you can create a perfect society. This wasn't new here. We're going to talk about this guy here named Robert Owen. But we've had this before. I mean, the Pilgrims and Puritans themselves came over here to create a better society. John Winthrop talked about a city on a hill. This idea that we're going to have this premier, like, elite society because we're going to do things right. All the other societies got it wrong. I have a better idea. That's a common idea among a lot of these people in the 1800s. So Robert Owen is going to create a utopian community. Spoiler alert, utopian communities never work. All right, which means like a perfect society with no crime or anything like that. So Robert Owen tried to create a society where there's like no money or anything. Everybody just had to like work together, mandated to work together and help each other out. So the problem with that, historically, why utopian communities never work, is because you can't make a perfect society because it's filled with people who are inherently imperfect. You can't make a perfect final product with imperfect pieces. So this was attempted a bunch of times. I just throw Robert Owen. I got a little picture of him here. This is old Robert Owen. You're going to forget his name of all of U.S. history. All right. We have talked about previously how the temperance movement, which was aimed to against alcohol, is easily forgotten. Robert Owen, I mean, I do it every year in class, and it's always relatively comical. I'll be like, all right, you're going to forget this guy's name. Then I talk all about him, and I talk about Dorthea Dix, and I talk about Noah Webster. I'm getting ready to. Then I show him your picture of Robert Owen. What's he famous for? Like blanks. Like we clearly never talked about him. Robert Owen has an incredibly forgettable name and face, which is always shocking to me. 2 decades I've been doing this, people still forget him. So Robert Owen created the most famous utopian society, but the most important thing is to understand what a utopian society is and how it was attempted multiple times. We have space, we have land. They've just never been successful, so we don't go into detail on them. They end up, human nature always takes over, and selfish and greed always ends that perfect ideal after about 6 months. All right. So let's talk about this woman right here, Dorthea Dix. She is crazy famous. All right. Very, very, very important. Kind of how Robert Owen, people can't remember what he does. Her, very important. So here's what Dorthea Dix does in the 1800s. All right. She goes and takes a tour of the prison system to see what's prison like in America. So she goes in there, and it's a lot of what you would expect in an 1800s prison. But what was shocking is when she would go downstairs, like into the basement of these prisons, she would go in there and see that there are people chained to the walls. Now, these aren't criminals. The people chained to the walls are people with mental disabilities, people with mental retardation, people with Down syndrome, severely depressed people who, have some type of chemical imbalance that they need help. Society doesn't know how to deal with those people, and they would just take them to jail and chain them like to a wall. And that's where they would live. Like, absolutely horrifying to Dorthea Dix. And she comes out and she was like, do y'all know what's happening over there? And like the whole country's horrified by it. Like the jails had been horrified by it too. There's no real bad guys here other than just our society is in general who just didn't realize, like, didn't have another solution to this. Not that was a very effective solution to begin with. So Dorthea Dix, she's going to come out, and there's going to be 2 reforms that you're going to associate her with. All right. And they deal with the same reasoning, all right? Whenever you hear the name Dorthea Dix on a test or a reading or anything, it's going to deal with either hospital reform or prison reform, because they're going to stop. When Dorthea Dix calls this out on everybody, they stop doing this. They're not going to keep people with mental health issues that are not criminals in jails anymore. All right. They're going to create separate mental hospitals for those people. And Dorthea Dix hospitals, which is still a type of mental hospital that exists today, still exists, named after Dorthea Dix. So Dorthea Dix is incredibly important with making prisons better. So even for the criminals that are still there, they are going to be treated better. Since it's in our Constitution that there is no cruel or inhumane treatment of prisoners, there is a minimum standard of living that has to be met there in the prison. So we put it in our Constitution. So this is why when people are like, prisoners should have to go and, whatever, prisoners should be punished when they're in prison. Yeah, you're not doing it. Being separated from society and having no sense of existing is the punishment, which is prison. So to say, they should be doing hard labor every day, it's the Constitution says you can't have cruel and unusual punishment. So that brings us to Noah Webster's spelling book. All right. So Noah Webster creates the dictionary. I can't imagine how incredibly boring that is to sit down and write a definition for every word. But the reason this is important is because this is the first time that America is going to have like the American version of English. So England is going to have their version of English, and America, we're going to have our version of English. So there's actually, even though it's the same language, we definitely use different words in different contexts, and that's what Noah Webster realized and made a dictionary so that people could evaluate the differences in the 2 different types. Like in England, the boot means like the trunk of a car, and in America, boot means like a boot. In America, we call it an apartment. Like if you live in an apartment, in England, it's called living in a flat. So there's just little stuff like that. But Noah Webster is famous for making what's called the American Spelling Book, which is a dictionary, and it gives the definition to the American terms using the English language. So we start to develop our own unique culture and language from England at the time. So the question here is, why is Dorthea Dix so important? We talked about her in detail, so if you will pause me and go through and answer this in complete sentences, we'll go ahead and move on. All right, art and literature. So, and this is going to be kind of crazy. The Hudson River School. Let me show you a picture here. This is the Hudson River School right here. The Hudson River School is not an actual school, but they are an American-style painters. Here's what's weird about it, all right, is the fact that this is American art. Anybody around the world looking at this like, that's American art. Why is that? Now, are they all painting American landscapes? Yes, in theory, all right. Here's what's crazy. Prior to American art, nobody painted landscapes. That's like an American thing. Painting a beautiful landscape is an American style art. Now, there's a group of guys in upstate New York at the time, which is countryside, as you can clearly tell, that they would paint the countryside in upstate New York, in the Hudson River Valley. Pure coincidence that all of these guys are there. They all use similar types of paint. They have a similar skill set, and they all paint for a living and then sell their paintings. Because there's a collection of these guys. And now they knew each other, but they didn't like train together or anything. They were collectively referred to as the Hudson River School. All of their paintings are equally valuable, and they made a bunch of it. And they actually benefited from each other because when 13 are painting, they're constantly having new paintings come out. So they have like a brand around the world. So people are constantly waiting for the next, Hudson River School painting to come out to spend gazillions of dollars on it. So I'll put these up here. These are from 4 different painters. All right. They're all very similar skill set. They all paint similar areas, which is all landscapes in the Hudson River Valley. So this is collectively referred to as the Hudson River School, these group of guys that would paint here. What is shocking to me is that America is the first ones that have committed to landscape. Super realistic. Like you took a photograph of it, landscape paintings. Nobody else did that. In Europe, they painted pictures of like people, and they had abstract stuff like Picasso and stuff like that. So the Hudson River School was painting beautiful landscapes, while the people in Europe were typically painting like people and painting emotions. And then like in Asia, they'd have like landscapes, but it's more cartoonish. The sun's really big and things like that. The hyper realistic, like HD type painting of landscapes is an American invention, which is crazy that nobody prior to a couple hundred years ago was like, that's a beautiful sunset, I should paint it. There's no pictures or anything like that. So keep in mind, if you wanted a beautiful landscape, you had to have it painted because, they didn't have photographs at the time. And even once that comes out, it's still going to be in black and white. So the Hudson River School is uniquely an American thing. There's another dude, and we're going to talk about him more when we get to the later part of American history and American too. There's a guy named Mark Twain. Mark Twain is very famous at the time because he wrote a bunch of books, fictional characters, Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, that were about a 6th or 7th grade reading level. Since we had public school, all right, thanks to this guy named Horace Mann. All right, and you're going to need to know Horace's man's name because Horace Mann, he created public school. Since everybody can read now, because Horace Mann organized national public school, and you can remember Horace Mann, all right, because whenever you're like, oh, I don't want to go to school, or I don't want to, sign in today, just remember, you're being held down, and you're being held down by the man, Horace Mann. So you're like, I don't want to go to school. The man has me again. Horace Mann. So Horace Mann organized this idea of everybody having the same public education in America, so people can read. Mark Twain writes fictional fun books for people to read. So Mark Twain becomes very famous and very popular in the 1800s because he was a very famous author. Mark Twain will come up again because not only is he a famous author and everybody loves reading his books, he's one of the few really rich guys by comparison. I mean, he's not like crazy rich, but he is wealthy and makes good money. He'd be upper middle class, what we would call him today. He stands up to a lot of these multi-millionaires in the late 1800s. These guys named robber barons that we'll talk about later on. And one of the reasons Mark Twain is in a unique position to stand up to these guys is that they basically owned the whole country, and anybody that stood up to them, they could just like fire them and ruin their lives. Mark Twain, he was independently making money from writing books, so they couldn't do anything about his trash talk and calling him out on what he thought their issues were. But we will mention him more moving forward. So the question here, what was the main difference between the art created by the Hudson River School and the art created in Europe? All right, so we had talked about that, so pause me if you need to, and we're going to be moving on. All right. Immigration. Immigration to the United States is going to skyrocket in the 1800s. All right. One of the big reasons is because of the factory work. We've been talking about the Industrial Revolution coming to the United States, and there's a lot of factories, especially up north. Because of that, there is a ton of immigrants coming into the United States. Now, there's something called push and pull factors, all right, that is really important to understand. So, immigrants are leaving countries all the time, all around the world, all right? And they're finding places to go all the time, all around the world. In the 1800s, any immigrants that were leaving their country, for the most part, were trying to come to America, all right? There's something called a push and a pull factor when people move countries, all right? A push factor is something that pushes you out of where you are. So, and that varied from country to country at different time periods. So the Irish, all right, their push factor, the negative thing that is pushing them out of Ireland is the Irish potato famine. And they ran out of potatoes, and that was a huge staple of their life, of their food. There wasn't enough food to feed everybody in Ireland. So sometimes students will make that connection. Irish potato famine, Irish are fleeing Ireland because there's not enough potatoes, and you think it's potato farmers that are the ones that are leaving. No, the potato farmers ain't going nowhere. Basically, long story short, there is a massive shortage of potatoes. So potato farmers that could grow potatoes, all right, they could jack up the price of their potatoes as high as they want because people will pay it. So the potato farmers are actually doing good. And the rich people were doing fine in Ireland because they could afford to buy the potatoes. Who struggled? The poor people in Ireland. The people who couldn't afford this new jacked up price of potatoes because there wasn't enough potatoes to go around. So poor people are leaving Ireland desperately trying to find a place to go. So the push factor is that there's the potato famine. All right. And the pull factor is what's positive. It's what pulls you to where you're going. Whether you're moving houses down the street or anywhere, anytime you've ever relocated, there's usually a push factor, something like that's negative, and then a pull factor, which pulls you to your new location. The pull factor in America is jobs. Why do the Irish want jobs? Because they want food. All right, they're wanting to come over and work for money to buy food. And so the Irish potato famine, there are Irish fleeing Ireland. They almost exclusively are going to come to America. America is going to embrace immigrants with open arms. So there's tons of Irish going to come over to the United States. The next biggest group are Germans. There's some political instability in Germany at the time, long before any of the Hitler or anything like that situation. But there's some political instability in Germany, which is pushing out some Germans. Now, the Germans that are leaving are more lower middle class Germans that are leaving, and they all have a very specific skill set. And it's crazy to me. I did not realize this until I started teaching U.S. history. That, do y'all know what the majority of the immigrants of the Germans that came over, what industry that they were in? It's completely random. I did not know this. I'm not going to wait for you to answer because I'm looking at the screen. The dairy industry, all right? So here's a map in 1850, right? So 1850, all right, that of where most of the immigrants that came over came to. Now, don't get this mistaken. Like in the South, it looks like the immigrants are showing up in the South. They're not. This map is for the immigrants that live there. Where's what country are they mainly from? So there might be only 3 immigrants in North Carolina. Well, if 2 of them were born in Ireland, all right, then North Carolina gets labeled Ireland here. Almost all of the immigrants up here are just packing in up north where these factories are, all right? But look where the Germans land. They're dairy farmers, all right? There is land out here to be purchased. It is a little cooler, which is fine they're not going to try to compete with the South and the Cotton Belt to try to get the good land down here. They don't need that. The cooler weather up here is kind of similar to the German weather. And they're dairy farmers. So like even present day, Wisconsin. Do you know what Wisconsin is known for? Cheese. And that is still a heritage of the German immigrants coming over with dairy farmers, and that's where cheese comes from, cheese and milk and dairy products. So Wisconsin is known for cheese, and it still comes from the German dairy farmers that came over here. This is important, all right, with the people coming over here. So the Germans came over here because there was land, and they could afford it, and it was a good place to start over. The Irish were desperate when they came over, and they're over here to work in the cities and get the jobs in the cities. So there's massive amounts of German immigrants and Irish immigrants, but they came over for really two different reasons. The Germans wanted land, and they wanted to be able to do their dairy farming here. Irish are trying to survive. They're going to go the quickest place they could go get a job, work really hard, and try to survive because they're starving to death. So this map right here does a good job of showing that. I really should just like cut out the bottom half of this map. There is no immigration to the South. There really was not. The South is on lockdown. Very few immigrants came into the South compared to the North and the Midwest right here. All right. So the question here is, why were so many immigrants coming to America at this time rather than other regions of the world? And we talked about that. America had better pull factors. So explain what some of those pull factors were that would encourage the Germans to come here, and that's going to encourage the Irish to come here. All right, backlash to immigrants. So America loves immigrants at the time. All right. And when I say America, I'm talking about the government. You know why the government loves immigrants? Because there's more people coming over here to work and pay taxes. More money for the government, the more powerful the government, the more stuff that they can do. So the government's like, a whole bunch of workers, absolutely, come on over here. The super rich people loved it too, because they're like, this dude will come over here and work for 2 pennies a day. Awesome, I'll hire 10 of them. So the rich people and the owners, or the rich people and the government of the United States loved immigrants. Tons of immigrants, just in massive waves. Come on over to America. Everything's great. So the immigrants, when they were leaving their country and they hear, hey, go to America, there's jobs there. And America's like, come on. They think they're going to show up and be welcomed with open arms. However, once the immigrants get here in America, they're never going to see those rich people. They're never going to see the leaders of the United States, all these people that encouraged them to come over here. They're going to see other poor Americans every day. The poor Americans are not happy to see the immigrants. It's very much that they took our jobs, because when the immigrants come over and they're willing to work for, we'll say, a nickel a day, well, all the other workers that had been here for a while that want a raise to get a dime a day, all right, they can't ask for more money, because if they do, what's going to happen? They're going to get fired, and they're just going to hire an Irish immigrant. So the immigrants, while they were convinced that this is this land of opportunity and everybody's going to give them hugs and everything when we get over here, once they got here, they realized that wasn't the case. That wasn't what they experienced. They met a lot of hostility from the people that were here in the United States already. So there was a huge backlash to the immigrants by the people the immigrants saw every day. While on paper, it looks like that the immigrants are going to be treated fairly and well, because the United States government wants them to come over. But in actuality, that is not the experience that they had. A lot of resentment that they experienced when they got here from their mother country. So you can go through and explain some of the reasons why, like they were Catholics and most of Americans were Protestants or whatever. Trying to justify why they're discriminated against is kind of a useless point, because here's why they're discriminated against. Different, all right, or new. It doesn't take, you could just make something up. But the Irish absolutely were discriminated against, more so than the Germans. And it wasn't that the Americans liked the Germans more. The Germans just moved out to the middle of the country and just had their own communities. You didn't see the Germans nearly as much as you would see the Irish immigrants, who were in the same cities and the same factories and all that. So the Irish probably dealt with the majority of the discrimination from the workers on a daily basis. So there is a term, and we're going to use it basically for the rest of, as long as you have me, nativism. Go ahead and get used to this word, nativism. Nativism is officially, it's the belief that people that are born in America should be treated better than people that were born in another country and came here. Nativism, to simplify it, is like racism against immigrants, all right? And it is very common in American history of this distrust and discrimination against immigrants, which, again, is shocking since we're all immigrants. And here's how crazy it is. So if you came here from another country, you dealt with all this discrimination your whole life, all right? Once you had kids in this country, all right, your kids would then hate the new immigrants that were coming in. It was like a one generational thing. Like, kids were never like, my parents were immigrants, so therefore I like immigrants. It's literally like, I was born here, nobody else should come here. It's that instantaneous in American history of, if you were born here, you don't like foreigners, even if your parents came here to give you a better life. It's where you're born, and it's crazy, the hypocrisy that exists here with this dislike of, like, oh, immigrants are garbage. Ain't your mom and dad an immigrant? That's different. Like, the logic when you're using discrimination, nativism, racism, sexism, you can't battle that with logic because it's naturally an illogical, man-made creation. Anywho, so this here is a map. It's not a map, it's a chart. These are the amount of groups coming in. So Ireland has like 3 million, from 1840 to 1860, 3 million immigrants coming to the United States. Germany has 1.5 million. And then you got England, 420,000, and then it drops off pretty quick. So the two major ones here are Germany and Ireland that are coming into the United States. So while the government and the rich people are like, hooray, and our official United States policy is super welcoming of the immigrants. Like, we're going to have the Statue of Liberty out here eventually. That's like, give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, like, hooray, like all this stuff. But the experience of the immigrants when they get here is very different because they're being discriminated against their equals here because of this concept of nativism that is rampant in America. So the question is, why did the American government welcome the immigrants into the United States with open arms, but the American people were not nearly as welcoming? What was the difference between what the government wanted and what the American people wanted? Like, why was there a difference in their reactions to them? So we talked about that. So pause me, go through, answer that in complete sentences, and we're going to move on. All right. So North and South tensions. This is pretty, it's pretty intense, like camping. The whole next unit is going to be talking about the North and the South tensions. And guess what the topic is? Slavery. All right. And the South is going to say they completely rely on slavery to make cotton, which they then sell to the North. And the North makes bank off of that cotton by selling it to the rest of the world. All right. The South says we can't do that if we don't have slaves. All right. The North says it's morally reprehensible. The South is like, keep your nose out of my business. And the North is like, don't think we can do that. That is what's going to happen in the 1800s over slavery, and the tension is going to build, which will lead to a civil war. All next unit, we're going to talk about the tensions between the North and the South. So to give you an example of this, the churches, and I think we had mentioned it a couple units ago, even in the South, the churches start saying that slavery is okay, that it's acceptable, it's a necessary evil. They talk about it all the time in the Bible, so it's got to be okay. The Northern churches are like, nah, that ain't cool. So the tension was so prevalent in America, and division was so prevalent in America, churches actually split. So like the Baptist church, use that as an example, the Baptist church, they officially ruled Baptist churches say slavery is bad. You have to say slavery is bad. Well, the Baptist churches in the South are like, yeah, if I say slavery is bad, none of the plantation owners are going to show up. And they're the only ones down here of money because everybody else is dirt poor. And we can't continue to function as a church if nobody gives an offering. So the Southern churches are going to start saying slavery is okay, but they can't officially remain like a Baptist church. So this is where the the Southern Baptists, they're going to break off and make their own denomination of Baptists called Southern Baptist, which says that slavery is necessary as long as you treat your slaves good. Like, that's the kind of things that they would start teaching at church. So even the churches in Christianity started splitting every aspect of society, started to split because you had to pick one side or the other on slavery. And we're going to talk about this in the next unit, and tensions just skyrocket. This picture right here is from the Fugitive Slave Act, and we will discuss this picture in particular next unit in detail. So the question is, what concept caused churches to split during this time, and why were they not unified in their approach to slavery? So we just got done talking about that. So answer this in complete sentences, and we are done with this lesson.